They took humanity's children and awoke the galaxy's deadliest predators. The starlit silence screamed as the hatch snapped shut. In the void beyond the observation deck, a convoy of black ships loomed, their obsidian hulls rippling like liquid under the faint glow of distant stars. The children had been taken, ripped from their beds in the dead of night. Every parent's nightmare was now humanity's burden, and the ache of it spread like wildfire across the fractured remains of Earth's colonies. They had no names, no demands, only shadowed forms and incomprehensible power. A single message had broadcast across every channel, every language, a warning carved into the minds of billions. We will take them, and you cannot stop us. Subscribe, like, and comment if you're ready to dive into the ultimate battle for humanity's survival, where the deadliest secrets of the galaxy awaken in the most unexpected way. Years later, the ache hadn't dulled, but it had transformed. Despair became determination, then obsession. The ships left no trace, no path to follow, no purpose revealed. They didn't need to. Humanity already knew it was powerless. But in the shadows of this helplessness, a small faction of rogue scientists and engineers, united by shared grief, refused to let the children be forgotten. They called themselves the Concordance. Dr. Elena Oren stood in the center of the Citadel, a colossal construct of steel and despair orbiting the abandoned ruins of Mars. Her voice carried over the gathered crowd, a mix of desperate survivors and hardened skeptics. We don't know where they've taken them, but we've found something, a pattern. And if this pattern holds, she hesitated, her breath catching, we might not just find the children. We might find something the galaxy doesn't want us to. The room buzzed with unease. She'd shown them the artifact recovered from the depths of Europa, a shimmering fragment of alien origin that emitted pulses matching the temporal sequence of the black ship's arrival. It wasn't a weapon or a map. It was a trigger, a signal buried deep in the fabric of space itself, older than any recorded history. They hadn't stolen humanity's children to destroy them. They'd done it to awaken something. Some dismissed it as delusion. Others whispered in dark corners of revenge, of striking back at the unknown abductors. But Elena knew better. This wasn't a battle they could fight. It was an unraveling of something far larger, far older than humanity's existence. The galaxy wasn't empty. It had merely been waiting. The first expedition left the Citadel in secret. The Ouroboros, a sleek stealth cruiser armed with experimental cloaking technology, slipped into the void under the cover of night. On board were 50 crew members, a mix of scientists, engineers, and ex-soldiers with nothing to lose. Elena led the charge, her every step burdened by the knowledge that they were heading into the jaws of the unknown. Weeks passed, then months. The artifact's signal grew stronger as they delved deeper into uncharted space. The crew grew restless, plagued by strange dreams. Visions of a child's laughter mingled with the roars of beasts. It was as if the signal was speaking to them, rewriting their very perception of reality. And then they found it. The station was ancient, its design utterly alien. Vast spires of bone-like material spiraled into a dying red star. In the heart of this macabre labyrinth, they found the chambers, rows upon rows of translucent pods, each containing a child. But they were not as they had been. Their eyes glowed faintly, their bodies encased in intricate exoskeletons of shimmering black and gold. The children weren't sleeping. They were waiting. As Elena approached, one of the pods hissed open. The child inside, a boy no older than 8, opened his eyes and smiled. His voice echoed not just in the room but in their minds, a chorus of countless other voices speaking as one. They took us to save you, but now you must run. They're coming. Elena's blood ran cold as a deep, guttural roar reverberated through the station. Whatever had been sleeping for millennia was awake, and humanity's children were no longer entirely human. They were something new, something born of both man and predator. The roar came again, louder, closer, and with it came the realization. They weren't alone in this station. The predators of the galaxy, long extinct, or so they thought, were here. And they were hunting. The roar was a vibration in the marrow, a primal sound that stripped thought down to instinct. Elena froze. Her breath caught in her throat as the boy stepped forward from his pod. His glowing eyes darted around the chamber, his body moving with a fluidity that was both human and alien. Behind him, the rest of the pods began to stir, releasing their young occupants. One by one, they emerged, silent and unafraid. "Follow me," the boy said, his voice still carrying that eerie, collective resonance. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. The crew hesitated. "We can't just leave," whispered Lieutenant Carr, his hand hovering over his sidearm. "What about the rest of them? We can't carry them all." "You won't need to," the boy replied without looking back. He extended his hand toward the far wall. It shimmered, then split open, revealing a passage lined with pulsating, organic material that seemed to shift and breathe. The children began filing into it without hesitation, as though they had walked this path 1,000 times before. Elena's mind raced, every fiber of her being urging her to grab the boy and demand answers. But something in his gaze stilled her. The children were leading now, and they understood this labyrinth far better than any of them ever could. The crew followed reluctantly, weapons drawn, their footsteps swallowed by the strange, fleshy floor. The walls pulsed like arteries, and the air grew thicker, charged with an energy that prickled against their skin. Deep in the station, the roar sounded again, closer now. The vibrations rippled through the walls, causing a faint tremor that sent dust and fragments raining down. "What are those things?" Elena asked, her voice a whisper. The boy turned his head slightly, enough to let her glimpse the glimmer of his otherworldly eyes. "Predators," he said simply. "They are what the galaxy feared before it forgot how to fear." Another roar, this one accompanied by a metallic screech that echoed through the passage like nails on glass. The crew picked up their pace, panic creeping into their movements. Carr muttered a curse under his breath, his grip tightening on his rifle. "If those things are as bad as they sound, why are we still in here? Why don't we just—" The boy stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. The crew skidded to a halt behind him. In the dim light, Elena could see his features harden, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Because if you run now," he said, "they'll follow you, and they'll never stop." Ahead, the passage opened into a cavernous chamber. The walls sparkled with crystalline formations, their surfaces refracting light in dizzying patterns. In the center of the room stood an altar-like structure, its surface etched with glyphs that seemed to pulse in time with the chamber's heartbeat. The children spread out, forming a loose circle around the altar. One of the younger girls stepped forward, her small hands hovering above the glyphs. As she began to trace them, the air grew heavy, vibrating with an almost musical hum. Elena watched in awe and terror as the glyphs lit up, their light crawling up the walls like veins of fire. "What are they doing?" Carr asked, his voice tight. "Calling it," the boy replied. Before anyone could ask what it was, the chamber shook violently. The crystalline formations shattered, their fragments swirling into the air like razor-sharp confetti. A deafening roar split the air, and then they saw it, a massive, grotesque form emerging from the shadows. It was both reptilian and insectoid, its body a writhing mass of scales and segmented armor. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, locking onto the group with predatory intent. Carr fired first, his rifle's crack echoing through the chamber. The bullets pinged harmlessly off the creature's armor, barely earning its notice. It lunged forward, its movements unervingly fast for something so large. "Move!" Elena shouted, grabbing Carr and pulling him toward the far wall. The crew scattered, their weapons useless against the beast. But the children stood their ground, their glowing eyes fixed on the creature. The boy stepped forward again, his voice rising above the chaos. "Enough!" he bellowed, and the sound carried an unnatural weight, reverberating through the chamber like thunder. The creature hesitated, its massive head swiveling toward him. For a moment, it seemed almost confused. Then the boy's body began to change. Black and gold tendrils spread across his skin, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with light. The other children followed suit, their forms shifting, becoming more alien with each passing second. Elena could only watch in stunned silence as the children attacked as one. They moved with blinding speed, their bodies a blur of claws, teeth, and shimmering armor. The creature roared in defiance, swiping at them with its massive claws, but it was no match for their precision. They tore into it with ruthless efficiency, their small forms darting in and out like shadows. Within moments, the beast lay motionless, its massive body crumpling to the ground with a resounding thud. The children stood over it, their glowing eyes unblinking. The boy turned to Elena, his face unreadable. "This is only the beginning," he said. "More will come, and so will we." Elena struggled to find her voice, her mind reeling from what she'd just witnessed. What are you?" "We are what they made us," the boy replied, "and what they feared we'd become." Behind him, the other children began to move, their attention shifting to another passage that led deeper into the station. The boy glanced back at Elena, his expression softening for a brief moment. "Come with us or stay behind. But whatever you do, don't stop moving. They'll be here soon." Elena's heart pounded as she stared down the darkened corridor where the children now moved with eerie purpose. The crew hesitated, their fear evident in every stiffened muscle and sharp, shallow breath. None of them had signed up for this, a journey into the unknown, following beings who were no longer entirely human, through a labyrinth built by entities who defied comprehension. But the sound of distant roars and the tremors that rippled through the station left no time for deliberation. "Move!" Elena barked, snapping the team out of their paralysis. They followed, their steps quick and uneven, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. The walls around them seemed to close in, the pulsating organic material undulating as though alive, reacting to their presence. The crew's nerves frayed with each passing second, their whispered doubts growing louder. "This isn't a rescue mission anymore," Carr muttered as he jogged beside Elena. His eyes darted toward the children leading them. "We don't even know what they are. What if they're leading us into a trap? They've had every opportunity to kill us already." Elena shot back, her voice low but firm. "If they wanted us dead, we wouldn't still be breathing." Ahead of them, the boy glanced over his shoulder, as if aware of their exchange. He didn't stop walking, but his voice echoed softly in their minds. "You're afraid of the wrong things. The station was designed to contain predators far worse than us." Carr flinched at the intrusion, his grip tightening on his rifle. Elena said nothing, but the boy's words sent a chill down her spine. The farther they went, the more the station revealed its secrets. Massive skeletal remains embedded in the walls, some still glinting with ancient, jagged armor. Whatever had once lived here wasn't just dangerous. It was a force of nature, a predator so perfect that extinction seemed less a tragedy and more a necessity for the survival of the galaxy. The children moved faster now, their pace driven by an urgency the adults couldn't understand. Every step deeper into the labyrinth brought new sounds, distant echoes of movement, guttural growls that seemed to multiply. Then the corridor opened into a vast chamber, larger than any they'd seen so far. The floor was lined with massive pods, far larger than the ones the children had emerged from. Each was filled with a thick, viscous liquid that pulsed faintly with light. Shapes stirred inside, hulking figures that dwarfed anything the crew had encountered before. Elena stepped closer, peering into one of the pods. The creature within was vaguely humanoid, but its features were grotesquely exaggerated. Razor-sharp claws, elongated limbs, and rows of serrated teeth that glinted even in stasis. "What the hell is this place?" whispered a crew member, their voice trembling. "A vault," the boy said, his tone matter-of-fact. "This is where they kept the first ones, the ones too dangerous to roam free. They locked them away and then tried to forget. And you woke them up," Carr said, his voice rising with anger. "What were you thinking?" The boy turned to him, his glowing eyes narrowing. "We didn't wake them. We are the failsafe. If they awaken, it's because something else already broke the seal." Before anyone could respond, the chamber shuddered violently. One of the pods cracked, its surface splintering as a deafening screech pierced the air. The creature inside writhed, its claws raking against the pod's interior as the liquid began to drain. "Run," the boy said, his voice deadly calm. No one needed convincing. The crew bolted toward the far end of the chamber, the children leading the way. Behind them, the pod burst open with a wet, sickening sound. Elena didn't dare look back, but the guttural roar that followed told her enough. Whatever had been trapped inside was awake now, and it was hunting. The corridor they fled into was narrow, its walls streaked with claw marks that suggested they weren't the first to use this as an escape route. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, heavy, thudding steps and the metallic scraping of claws against the floor. "Faster!" Elena shouted, her lungs burning. The boy suddenly stopped, turning to face the group. His body began to change again, the black and gold pattern spreading across his skin. "Go," he said firmly. "We'll hold it off." "What? No." Elena's voice cracked as she grabbed his arm. "We're not leaving you behind. You don't have a choice," the boy said, his voice calm but unyielding. "If it catches all of us, none of us will survive." The other children moved to his side, their transformations already underway. They're small. Frames became taller, leaner, more predatory, their movements fluid and unervingly graceful. "You need to trust us," the boy said, his glowing eyes meeting Elena's. For a moment, she saw something deeply human there. Fear, determination, and a desperate hope. Elena hesitated, then nodded. "We'll keep going, but you'd better catch up." The boy smirked faintly. "We always do." With that, the children turned and sprinted back toward the creature's roars, their forms disappearing into the darkness. Elena and the crew pushed forward, the corridor finally opening into another chamber. This one was different, sleek, metallic, and lined with consoles that glowed faintly with alien symbols. It felt alive, but not in the organic, pulsating way the rest of the station had. This place was a control center, its purpose unmistakable. As Elena stepped forward, the symbols on the nearest console shifted, rearranging themselves into something almost readable. The artifact she carried began to glow, its pulses syncing with the symbols. A message emerged, sharp and clear. "Activate defense grid?" Before she could process what that meant, the station shook violently, and a deafening roar echoed from the corridor they'd just left. Elena's heart sank. The children were still out there, and whatever was coming for them wasn't going to stop. Elena's hand hovered over the glowing console, her mind racing. The symbols flickered as if urging her to act, but the implications were terrifying. The term defense grid echoed ominously in her thoughts. Would it save them, or was it something far worse? An ancient weapon designed to obliterate everything in its path, including the children who had just sacrificed themselves to buy time? The station trembled again, the vibrations rippling through the chamber as the sounds of chaos grew louder. The monstrous predator was closing in, and there was no sign of the children. Around her, the crew shouted over one another, their fear bubbling into outright panic. "We don't know what it'll do," Carr shouted, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "If you hit that button, we could be blowing ourselves to hell. And if we don't, we're already dead." Elena snapped, her voice slicing through the din. She turned back to the console, steeling herself. The artifact she carried pulsed rhythmically in her hand, as if urging her forward. The glowing symbols seemed to dance in anticipation. "Do it," a voice whispered in her mind. It wasn't her own. It was the boy's. Elena took a deep breath, her fingers grazing the console. The instant her palm made contact, the entire chamber lit up, a blinding surge of light that spread outward like a living thing. The hum of energy was deafening, and for a brief moment, everything froze. Then the station came alive. Massive panels slid open along the walls, revealing ancient weaponry embedded in the structure itself. Spires of energy erupted from the ground, their crackling powers surging through conduits that spread like veins across the chamber. The tremors intensified, and the roars from the corridor turned into unearthly howls of pain. The crew shielded their eyes as a massive pulse of energy shot down the corridor. The walls seemed to fold in on themselves, reshaping to trap whatever was inside. The screeching of the predator abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie, deafening silence in its wake. Elena staggered back from the console, her chest heaving, the artifact in her hand dimmed, its glow fading to nothing. The crew exchanged nervous glances, the reality of their survival slowly sinking in. "Did it work?" someone asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Elena didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the corridor, waiting, dreading what might emerge. And then she saw them, the children. They came limping back into the chamber, their forms battered but alive. The boy led them, his glowing eyes dim but steady. His body was still partially transformed, the black and gold patterns flickering, as if struggling to hold their shape. "You bought us time," he said simply, his voice rasping with exhaustion. "But it's not over." "What do you mean?" Elena asked, her relief quickly replaced by dread. The boy gestured toward the console. "This grid wasn't just for the station. It's a beacon. It'll draw them here, all of them. Every predator that's been dormant in this galaxy will know where we are." The crew erupted into panicked protests, their voices a cacophony of fear and disbelief. Elena raised her hand, silencing them. "Why would the grid be designed like that?" she demanded. "Because it was never meant to defend," the boy replied. "It was meant to contain. The beings who built this place didn't want to destroy the predators. They wanted to keep them here, isolated. The grid signals the start of that containment." Carr stepped forward, his face twisted with fury. "So, what? We're the bait now. Is that what you're saying?" The boy didn't flinch. "Yes." Elena's mind reeled. She turned back to the console, scanning the alien symbols for some kind of solution. But the artifact in her hand remained dim, its guidance gone. The reality was sinking in. They had triggered something far beyond their control, something that could change the fate of the galaxy. The station shook again, but this time it wasn't from the predator they had just defeated. A low, resonant hum filled the air, and the walls began to shift. Panels opened, revealing vast, glowing constructs that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. "What's happening now?" one of the crew whispered, their voice trembling. The boy tilted his head, listening. "The station is realigning, preparing for what's coming." "What exactly is coming?" Elena demanded. The boy turned to her, his expression grim. "The predators that survived extinction, the ones who learned to sleep through the ages. And they won't stop until this galaxy belongs to them again." The chamber erupted into chaos once more as the crew scrambled to make sense of the situation. Elena grabbed the boy by the shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Is there any way to stop them?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but you won't like it." Elena didn't blink. "Tell me." "The grid wasn't just designed to contain the predators," he explained. "It can also wipe them out, but it requires more than energy. It needs a living catalyst, someone to fuse with the system, to become part of it." The implications hit Elena like a blow to the chest. She glanced around the chamber, her gaze falling on the terrified faces of her crew. None of them had signed up for this. None of them deserved to be sacrificed. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. The boy shook his head. "It has to be one of us. The system was designed for beings like us, half human, half predator. You wouldn't survive the process." Elena felt her throat tighten. "You mean one of the children?" "Yes," the boy said, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "It's the only way." The silence that followed was suffocating. The children stood quietly, their faces unreadable. They knew what was being asked of them, and yet none of them protested. Finally, the boy stepped forward. "I'll do it," he said. "No." Elena's voice cracked as she reached for him, but he stepped out of her grasp. "It's what I was made for," he said simply. "We were never meant to survive. We were meant to end this." The boy's words hung heavy in the air, a stark and devastating truth. The crew fell silent, their protest stifled by the gravity of what they'd just heard. Elena stared at him, her mind screaming against the inevitability of his decision. He was just a child, or at least he had been once. Now, he stood resolute, a figure that transcended innocence, shaped into something unrecognizable by forces far beyond his control. "You don't have to do this," Elena said, her voice trembling. "There has to be another way." The boy shook his head slowly. "This is what I was born for. What we were all born for." He gestured to the other children, who stood quietly behind him, their faces a mixture of acceptance and determination. "We were never meant to live normal lives. They made sure of that." Carr stepped forward, his face contorted with frustration and grief. "Made by who? Who did this to you? And why?" The boy's glowing eyes flickered, his gaze distant. "You've already met them," he said softly. "The ones who built the station. The ones who wanted to control what they feared. When they realized they couldn't, they created us. Tools, weapons, call us what you will. They needed something they could unleash without losing control. Something that wouldn't become them. And you're okay with being sacrificed for their mistakes." Carr's voice rose, his anger barely contained. "It's not about being okay with it," the boy replied. "It's about what needs to be done. If we don't stop them now, nothing will. They'll wake all the others, and this galaxy won't just lose its future. It'll lose its past, its present, everything. This is bigger than any of us." The floor beneath them shuddered violently, cutting off any further argument. The walls around the chamber lit up with alien runes, their glow pulsating in an erratic, almost panic rhythm. The station systems were screaming a warning, but the language was lost on them. Elena turned to the console, the alien symbols shifting again. They seemed to anticipate her thoughts, forming a question that chilled her to the core. Initiate full termination sequence? Her hand hesitated over the console. She knew what the sequence implied, what it demanded, but pressing that button meant endorsing the boy's decision, condemning him to a fate she couldn't begin to fathom. Her chest tightened as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. The boy placed a hand on her arm, his touch light but firm. "It has to be me," he said quietly. "None of the others can handle the strain, and neither can you." Elena's throat tightened as she fought back tears. "You're just a child," she whispered. "No," he said, his voice steady. "Not anymore." The other children stepped forward, surrounding the boy in a protective circle. Their glowing eyes flickered in unison, their movements synchronized as though driven by a single, shared purpose. It was clear they understood what was about to happen, and that they wouldn't stop it. The console's glow intensified, the question pulsing more urgently. The station systems were primed and waiting, their alien intelligence sensing the approach of something catastrophic. From the depths of the station, a low, guttural roar reverberated through the walls. The predators were drawing closer, their presence a growing shadow of dread that no one could ignore. "Elena," Carr said, his voice cracking, "we're out of time." She turned to the boy, her vision blurred by unshed tears. "Will it hurt?" He gave her a faint smile, one that was both heartbreaking and filled with quiet courage. "I don't think it'll matter." Elena's hand shook as she placed it over the console. She looked into the boy's glowing eyes one last time, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. With a deep breath, she pressed the symbol. The chamber erupted in light, a blinding cascade of energy that surged through the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. The artifact in her hand disintegrated into dust, its purpose fulfilled. The boy's body glowed brighter than ever, the black and gold patterns consuming him entirely. He floated upward, his small frame enveloped by the station's energy. The other children stood still, their faces serene as they watched him transform into something greater, something incomprehensible. The glow expanded, filling the chamber with an overwhelming warmth that seemed to reach into their very souls. The station trembled violently as the energy surged outward, traveling through every corridor and chamber, through every forgotten conduit and sealed vault. The predator's roars turned into agonized shrieks, then silence. Elena shielded her eyes as the light grew too intense to bear. When it finally faded, the boy was gone. The chamber was quiet now, the hum of the station systems reduced to a gentle whisper. The runes on the walls dimmed, their purpose fulfilled. The other children stood silently, their glowing eyes flickering weakly before fading entirely. Elena dropped to her knees, her chest heaving as the weight of what had just happened crashed over her. The crew gathered around her, their faces pale and drawn. No one spoke. Then, from somewhere deep within the station, a single sound echoed, a soft, rhythmic pulse. The grid was still active, its energy now flowing in a steady, controlled rhythm. Whatever the boy had become, he was still here, integrated into the station itself, ensuring that the predators would never rise again. Elena placed a trembling hand on the console, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." The station's lights flickered briefly in response, as if acknowledging her words. Then all was still. The silence in the chamber felt oppressive, almost suffocating. The crew stood motionless, each of them grappling with the enormity of what had just occurred. The boy, whatever he had been, was gone, his presence now absorbed into the station's vast, incomprehensible machinery. But his sacrifice left an echo, one that hung heavy in the air like a weight none of them could shake. "Elena," Carr said finally, his voice soft but insistent. "We need to move. We're not out of this yet." Elena forced herself to her feet, her body trembling from exhaustion and grief. She glanced at the children, their once glowing eyes now dull and lifeless. They stood together in a silent cluster, their expressions unreadable. The transformation they had undergone, the predatory edge that had made them so alien, seemed to have faded. In the absence of their leader, they looked fragile, like children once again. "Are you all right?" she asked them, her voice strained. One of the girls, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, nodded faintly. "We're different now," she murmured. "He took it with him. The part of us that was more." Elena's heart twisted. The boy hadn't just sacrificed himself to stop the predators. He had taken the burden of their transformation with him, leaving these children as close to human as they could ever hope to be. "We have to go," she said, her voice firmer now. "The station might have neutralized the immediate threat, but we can't stay here. This place is still dangerous." The crew began moving toward the nearest exit, their steps hesitant but determined. The children followed silently, their small frames casting long shadows in the dim, flickering light. The corridors they passed through felt different now, calmer, quieter. The organic pulsations that had once made the walls seem alive had stilled, as though the station itself had exhaled after centuries of tension. But there was still an unsettling energy in the air, a lingering sense of unease that kept everyone on edge. As they moved deeper into the station, Elena noticed changes in the architecture. The walls grew sleeker, more metallic, and the alien runes became more prominent, glowing faintly as if guiding their path. The artifact might have been destroyed, but it seemed the station still recognized them as its wards, or perhaps its captives. "What if it doesn't let us leave?" Carr asked, his voice tinged with paranoia. "What if we're part of the system now, like he is?" Elena didn't answer immediately. The thought had crossed her mind, but she refused to entertain it. "We'll find a way out," she said finally. "We have to." The corridor opened into another vast chamber, this one lined with enormous, transparent panels that revealed the void of space beyond. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. The station was massive, far larger than they had initially realized. Its spires extended like skeletal fingers, stretching toward distant stars. And beyond it, in the vastness of the galaxy, shadows moved. Elena froze, her blood running cold. The predators weren't just on the station. There were others, countless others, stirring in the void. Some drifted in the wreckage of ancient ships, their forms grotesque and nightmarish. Others clung to asteroids, their glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "They're out there," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Carr stepped up beside her, his face pale as he followed her gaze. "How many?" "Too many," Elena replied. The children huddled closer together, their fear palpable. One of them, a boy who couldn't have been older than 8, spoke up. "The grid will hold them. He'll hold them. That's what he's there for." Elena nodded slowly, forcing herself to believe it. The boy, the being they had lost, had become something far greater than any of them. His presence within the station wasn't just a sacrifice. It was a safeguard, a barrier between humanity and the horrors lurking in the galaxy's dark corners. But the sight of those predators, awake and waiting, was a reminder that the grid wasn't a permanent solution. It was a stopgap, a delaying tactic in a war that humanity hadn't even realized it was fighting. The crew pressed onward, following the faint glow of the ruins until they reached what appeared to be a hangar. The chamber was enormous, its walls lined with strange, angular ships that looked impossibly advanced. Most were damaged, their hulls scorched and corroded by time, but a few glinted in the dim light, their surfaces pristine. "Do you think they work?" Carr asked, approaching one of the ships cautiously. "We're about to find out," Elena replied. She climbed into the nearest vessel, its hatch hissing open with surprising ease. The interior was sleek and minimal, its controls glowing faintly. It didn't look like anything she'd ever seen, but somehow she felt a strange familiarity with it, as though the station itself was guiding her. The other crew members followed suit, splitting up to board the functional ships. The children clambered into Elena's vessel, their small faces filled with equal parts wonder and apprehension. As she settled into the pilot's seat, the console lit up, its alien symbols rearranging themselves into something almost legible. A series of images flashed before her eyes. Star charts, navigation routes, and warnings of regions to avoid. The station wasn't just letting them leave. It was giving them a chance to survive. "Elena," Carr's voice crackled over the comms, startling her. "These ships, they're fast. Really fast. We might actually make it out of here." Elena allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. "Then let's not waste any more time." The ships powered up with a low hum, their engines glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. One by one, they lifted off the hangar floor, their movements smooth and precise. Elena gripped the controls tightly, her heart pounding as the vessel surged forward. As they exited the station, the vastness of space stretched out before them, infinite and overwhelming. Behind them, the station loomed like a silent sentinel, its spires glowing faintly as the grid pulsed with steady energy. But the predators were still out there, their forms stirring in the distance. The grid might hold them for now, but Elena knew it was only a matter of time before someone challenged its power. As the ships accelerated, the stars streaking past the viewport, Elena felt a sense of determination harden within her. They had survived this nightmare, but the fight wasn't over. It couldn't be. The galaxy wasn't safe, not yet. "We'll find a way," she whispered to herself, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. "We'll be ready." The ship streaked through the endless void, their alien engines humming with a precision that felt almost sentient. Elena sat stiffly in the pilot's seat, her hands gripping the controls even though the craft seemed to fly itself. The children sat huddled behind her, their once resilient silence now punctuated by whispers and soft sobs. The weight of everything that had transpired bore down on all of them, an oppressive force that no amount of distance from the station could lift. Carr's voice crackled through the comms, breaking the silence. Elena, we're approaching the outer edge of the grid's field. Whatever this thing is, it's broadcasting some kind of protective barrier. Elena glanced at her ship's display, the alien symbols shifting into patterns she had begun to intuitively understand. The grid extended farther than she'd imagined, a vast, pulsating network of energy surrounding the station like an invisible fortress. It was holding the predators at bay, for now. But what happens when we cross it? Elena asked. Will they follow us? Carr was silent for a moment before replying. I don't know. The boy said the grid was meant to contain them, but we can't assume it's foolproof. If even one of those things escapes, his voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken horrors hanging in the air. Elena's jaw tightened. Then we don't stop moving. We put as much distance between us and this place as we can, and we warn whoever's out there about what's coming. The ship's controls shifted suddenly, the display flaring with new symbols. Elena frowned, leaning closer. The alien console was showing her something, a distant star system, its coordinates flashing insistently. What is this? She muttered, her fingers grazing the symbols. One of the children, a girl with wide, frightened eyes, stepped closer. He's showing you where to go, she said softly. Elena turned to her, startled. What do you mean? The girl's voice was calm, almost eerily so. He's still here, not just in the station. In all of this, she gestured to the ship around him. He's guiding us. Elena's stomach churned at the thought. The boy's sacrifice had been complete. He wasn't just a part of the station. He had become its intelligence, its will. And now, even from light years away, he was steering them. The ship's engines flared brighter, and Elena's hands flew to the controls as the vessel surged forward, its trajectory locking onto the distant coordinates. She tried to override the system, but the ship refused to respond. Carr, she said into the comms, her voice tight with urgency. Are your controls locked too? A pause, then. Yeah, it's like the ship's got a mind of its own. It does. Elena muttered under her breath. She turned to the children. Is this him? Is he the one doing this? The girl nodded. He knows where we need to go. Elena exhaled sharply, frustration and unease warring within her. And where is that exactly? The girl hesitated before answering. To the others, the ones like us. The word sent a chill down Elena's spine. She had barely begun to comprehend the tragedy of the children they'd rescued. Genetically engineered hybrids, bred for war and abandoned to their fates. The idea that there were more of them out there, scattered across the galaxy, was almost too much to process. Others, Carr's voice cut through the comms. You're telling me there are more of these kids? How many? The girl shrugged, her expression unreadable. Hundreds, maybe thousands. They were hidden after the experiments ended, sent to places where no one would look. But they're waking up now, like we did. Elena's mind raced. If the predators were stirring, it made sense that their creators, or whatever was left of them, would want their weapons active again. But the thought of finding more children, more beings like the boy, was both heartbreaking and terrifying. Why is he taking us to them? Elena asked. The girl's gaze didn't waver. Because we're stronger together. The ship's engines roared as it accelerated further, pulling the fleet into the uncharted reaches of space. The grid's protective barrier faded behind them, its glow diminishing until it was nothing more than a faint memory in the distance. As they crossed the boundary, Elena held her breath, waiting for some sign that the predators were following. But the void remained still, the shadows of the creatures confined to the edges of the grid. For now. Looks like we're clear, Carr said, relief evident in his voice. For now, Elena replied. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had only delayed the inevitable. Hours passed as the ships hurtled through the darkness, the coordinates pulling them ever closer to an unknown destination. The children drifted into a restless sleep, their small bodies curled together for warmth and comfort. The crew exchanged hushed conversations over the comms, their voices tinged with exhaustion and fear. Elena remained awake, her eyes fixed on the viewport. Stars streaked past in brilliant lines of light, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the boy, on the predators, on the future that awaited them all. Finally, the ship's console chimed, signaling their approach to the designated system. Elena leaned forward, her heart pounding as the vessels emerged from hyperspace. Before them lay a desolate planet, its surface scarred and barren, but nestled within its canyons were structures, massive, ancient, and unmistakably alien. Elena, Carr's voice crackled, filled with awe and apprehension. What the hell are we looking at? She didn't answer. Her ship's display flared again, the symbols shifting to form a single, haunting message. Sanctuary. The girl behind her stirred, her glowing eyes flickering faintly as she gazed at the planet. "They're here," she said softly. Elena's grip tightened on the controls as the ship began its descent. Whatever waited for them on that surface, it was clear there was no turning back now. The ships descended into the planet's atmosphere, cutting through the thin, toxic clouds with an eerie, controlled grace. The surface below was a wasteland, but there was something unsettlingly beautiful about it. The stark contrast between the craggy mountain ranges and the shimmering ruins that hinted at long-forgotten civilizations. The landscape was devoid of life, its barren plains dotted with strange, angular structures that rose from the dust like the skeletal remains of a dead god. As Elena's ship touched down with a soft thud, the children stirred, their faces now devoid of fear, replaced with an air of somber expectation. They were no longer the weaponized, unnatural beings they had once been. They were something new, something between worlds. The boy had given them a future, but it wasn't one any of them could have anticipated. The crew stepped out of their vessels, their boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the wind carried a low, mournful howl that seemed to reverberate through the ruins. There was no sign of life, no animals, no plants, nothing but the towering structures and the odd remnants of what could have been a once great city. "Where are we?" Carr asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He took a step forward, his eyes scanning the horizon. Elena's gaze drifted to the ruins ahead. "It looks like some kind of ancient settlement, but this isn't the place. This isn't the destination he showed us." The girl, who had spoken so confidently earlier, now looked uncertain. "This is where we woke up," she said softly. "Where we were hidden. It's where they stored us." The weight of her words sank in, and for a moment, Elena couldn't speak. This desolate place, this planet, was where it had all begun. The creation of the children, the experiments, the twisted sense of control. This was a place where their future had been stolen from them. "Why are we here now?" Carr asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "What's the purpose of this place?" The girl's eyes flickered, her gaze distant. "This is where the others are, where they're waiting." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, distant rumble echoed through the air, growing steadily louder. The ruins shifted, as though they were alive, as though the planet itself was responding to an unseen force. "What the hell was that?" Carr shouted, instinctively reaching for his weapon. "I don't know," Elena replied, her heart racing. She could feel the vibration underfoot, the air thickening with tension. "But I think we're not alone." The sound grew louder, closer, until the ground beneath their feet shook violently. The sky darkened, the strange alien clouds swirling in chaotic patterns above them. A high-pitched, mechanical whine filled the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Elena's pulse quickened as she turned toward the sound, her mind racing. From the depths of the ruins, something massive was emerging, something that had been waiting. The ground cracked open, sending up plumes of dust and debris. Massive figures began to rise from the shadows, their shapes indistinct at first, but growing clearer as they stepped into the light. They were humanoid, but their proportions were all wrong. Taller than any human, their limbs elongated and misshapen, their bodies covered in strange, glowing patterns. Their eyes were hollow, empty, like the remnants of long-dead creatures, and their skin shimmered with an unnatural sheen. The children stepped forward, their eyes flickering with the same strange glow that had once characterized the boy. They were no longer afraid. Instead, they seemed to recognize these creatures, these ancient beings, as their kin. "Are these the others?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," the girl answered, her tone reverent. "They were waiting for us. They were waiting for him." The creatures moved toward the group, their long strides bringing them closer with unnatural speed. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The air was thick, with the tension of an ancient reunion, a bond that transcended words. The lead creature, its eyes glowing an ominous red, halted in front of Elena. It towered over her, its skeletal frame giving off an eerie, almost otherworldly presence. Then, with a strange, resonant hum, it extended a long, clawed hand toward her. Elena flinched instinctively, but didn't pull away. She had seen this before, the hand of the boy, of the hybrid children, the glow in their eyes, the way they seemed connected to something much older, much more dangerous than anything she had ever known. This creature was like them, and yet not. It was the past, the future, and the unknown all at once. Tentatively, she reached out, placing her hand against its glowing palm. A rush of energy coursed through her, not painful but overwhelming. Like the force of an ancient storm, the weight of 1,000 memories pressing down on her. Visions flashed before her eyes. Memories of the boy, of the experiments, of the creation of the hybrid children, and the devastating consequences of their existence. She saw the galaxy torn apart by the very predators they had once been created to control. And then, amidst the chaos, she saw the grid, the vast network of energy that had kept the predators at bay. But it was breaking, its edges fraying. The boy's sacrifice had been just the beginning. The real battle was coming, and it would take more than just a few children to stop it. The vision faded as the creature withdrew its hand, leaving Elena breathless and shaken. "They're waking up," the creature said, its voice low and guttural, as if it had not spoken in millennia. Its words weren't audible, but Elena understood them nonetheless. "Elena?" Carr's voice came through her calms, laced with anxiety. "What the hell is happening?" She shook her head, trying to collect herself. "They're connected to the grid," she murmured. "And they're waking up, just like we did." Carr cursed under his breath. "This is worse than we thought. If they're all connected, if they can control the predators." The creature's glowing eyes flashed, and it let out a resonant hum that echoed through the ruins, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "Elena, we need to get out of here," Carr urged. "We don't know what these things are capable of." But Elena remained rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on the towering figure in front of her. "We can't run anymore," she whispered. "This is our fight now." The creature nodded slowly, as though acknowledging her words. Then, without warning, it turned and began to lead them deeper into the ruins. The others followed without question, their path set by the ancient beings who had awaited their arrival for so long. Elena took a deep breath, her heart racing with fear and anticipation. There was no going back now. Whatever was coming, whatever force had created these children, was ready to make its move. The future of the galaxy, of humanity, was in their hands. The ruins seemed endless as they ventured deeper, the structures rising higher with each step. The air was thick with an almost palpable tension, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The children moved in eerie unison, their eyes glowing with a soft, pulsing light that mirrored the strange symbols etched into the walls. Elena couldn't help but feel as if they were walking through the corridors of a forgotten empire, one that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations before theirs. The ground beneath them trembled again, the deep, rumbling sound reverberating through the planet's surface. The creatures, Those ancient beings moved ahead of them with purpose, guiding them towards something Elena could barely comprehend. She could feel the weight of their presence, a silent but undeniable force pressing against her, as though they were drawing her in. Carr fell into step beside her, his expression grim. "I don't like this, Elena," he muttered. "I've seen enough military installations, enough ruins to know when something's not right. This place isn't just some old relic. It's active." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. "I know, but we don't have a choice." The children were leading them somewhere specific. Elena could feel it in the way they moved, their steps deliberate, as if they knew exactly where they were going. And the further they went, the more the air seemed to hum, charged with an energy that both exhilarated and terrified her. At last, they came to a massive, domed structure at the heart of the ruins. The walls were adorned with the same strange symbols as the rest of the city. But here, they seemed to glow brighter, almost alive. The entrance was vast, its doors opening slowly at the approach of the children. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine as they stepped inside, the temperature dropping suddenly, as though they had crossed into another world entirely. The interior was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were smooth, almost metallic, and the air was thick with an electric charge that made her hair stand on end. In the center of the room was a massive, pulsating core, its light flickering like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Elena's heart raced. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl who had spoken earlier stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter as she approached the core. "This is where it all began," she said softly. "This is where we were made." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" The girl's gaze never wavered from the core. "We were created to fight the predators, to control them, but they were too powerful, too destructive. So they locked them away, created the grid to contain them." Carr stepped forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You're saying all of this entire place, was just a prison for those things?" The girl nodded. "Yes, and it's failing. The predators are waking up and the grid is weakening. We're the only ones who can stop it." Elena's mind raced. "But how? How do we stop them?" The girl turned to face her, her expression somber. "We have to become what we were always meant to be. We are the key. The predators were never the true threat. We are." The weight of her words hit Elena like a physical blow. For so long, she had thought the predators were the enemy, the unstoppable force that threatened to consume everything in its path. But now, she was faced with a revelation that shook her to her core. The children, the hybrids, were not just the result of an experiment gone wrong. They were part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. The core began to pulse faster, its light growing blindingly bright. Elena shielded her eyes, but the intensity of the energy forced her to her knees. A low, thrumming sound filled the room, vibrating through her bones as the very walls seemed to hum with life. The children stepped forward, their eyes glowing brighter, their bodies twitching with a sudden, violent energy. Elena could feel it too, a surge of power coursing through her veins, as if the planet itself was feeding her strength. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them split open, and from the depths of the planet, a vast, dark shape began to rise. It was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Massive, shapeless, a mass of writhing darkness that seemed to consume everything in its path. It was a predator, yes, but it was more than that. It was a force, a primal entity born from the very fabric of the galaxy itself. The core's light flickered violently, its energy flaring as the creature emerged, its dark tendrils reaching out to consume everything around it. Elena could feel its power, an insidious, suffocating force that threatened to drown them all. But the children, her children, were not afraid. They stood tall, their eyes glowing like the stars themselves, their bodies now pulsing with the same energy that had once bound them to this place. "It's time," the girl whispered. "We have to stop it. We were born to stop it." Elena barely had time to react before the children began to move in unison, their bodies shifting as though they were becoming one with the planet, one with the energy that surrounded them. They channeled the power of the core, using it to push back against the creature that threatened to tear the galaxy apart. The battle was not one of weapons, not one of violence. It was a war of wills, of raw, primal energy. Elena could feel it building around her, the immense force pushing against her as she struggled to stand. The predator's tendrils lashed out, but the children fought back with a strength they had never known, their bodies now completely fused with the energy of the planet itself. For what seemed like an eternity, the two forces clashed, one born from the stars, the other from the deepest, darkest corners of the galaxy. And then, with a final, earth-shattering roar, the creature was consumed by the light, its darkness dissipating into the ether. The room fell silent. Elena blinked, disoriented, her body trembling from the intensity of the battle. The children were standing still, their eyes dimming as the energy that had once fueled them began to fade. The core's light flickered one last time before going dark. The planet, once alive with energy, now felt eerily still. And in that stillness, Elena realized the truth. The children had not just saved them. They had ended the cycle. They had freed the galaxy from the darkness that had been festering for so long. Carr approached her, his face pale. "Is it over?" he asked softly. Elena looked around the room, her gaze settling on the children. Their eyes were no longer glowing, their energy spent. But there was something else there, something more than the destructive power that had once defined them. "It's over," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "For now." And with that, they turned and walked away from the ruins, leaving behind the remnants of a war that had never truly ended. As they boarded their ships and prepared to leave the desolate planet behind, Elena glanced at the stars one last time. There was peace in the galaxy now, but it was a fragile peace. And as the ships soared into the unknown, Elena knew that the future of humanity, of all life, would depend on the choices they made. The predators had been defeated, but there was always more lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when the light faded once more. The tension in the air was palpable as the fleet of ships made their way into the distant reaches of the galaxy. Elena sat alone in the cockpit of her vessel, her fingers gripping the controls as her eyes stared out at the stars. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with the endless unknowns of space. But for the first time since everything had begun, she felt a sense of calm. The children were asleep in the back of the ship, their bodies exhausted from the unimaginable energy they had channeled to defeat the predators. They had given everything to protect the galaxy, to free it from the nightmare they had been born to face. And though they had succeeded, there was something bittersweet about their victory. Elena's mind kept returning to the girl, the one who had known more than she ever could have imagined. She was still processing everything. The ancient beings, the predators, the mysterious grid that had held it all together for so long. But one thing remained clear. The children were more than just weapons. They were something entirely different, something greater. They were the bridge between the past and the future, the force that would guide humanity to a new era, if they could learn to control the power they now wielded. "Do you think they'll ever truly understand what they've done?" Carr's voice crackled through the comms. He had come to sit with her, now that the silence of space surrounded them. Elena glanced over at him, his face a mixture of weariness and hope. "I don't think they'll ever fully understand," she replied softly. "But I think they're starting to see it, the power they've unlocked. It's not just the destruction they're capable of, but the creation too. They're the beginning of something new." Carr didn't respond immediately. The hum of the ship's engines filled the space between them, the vastness of the galaxy stretching out in every direction. There was a moment of peace, a silence that felt like a respite from everything that had come before. Then, without warning, Elena's comms blared to life. The signal was faint but unmistakable. "Elena? Elena, do you read me?" Her heart skipped a beat. The voice on the other end was familiar, one she hadn't heard in far too long. The last time she'd spoken to him, he had been on the other side of the galaxy, lost to the chaos that had consumed everything. "Jason?" Elena's voice cracked with emotion. "Is that really you?" There was a pause before he responded, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "It's me, and we need to talk. Now." Elena's mind raced as the implications of his words sank in. Jason was back, the one who had helped build the grid, the one who had kept the predators at bay. But there was more to this than just a reunion. She could hear it in his tone, the same urgency that had led them to this point. "Where are you?" Elena asked, her pulse quickening. "I'm close. But there's something you need to know," Jason continued. "The predators, they weren't the only thing we were holding back." Elena's stomach churned. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Jason's voice dropped to a whisper. "There's another force out there, something much worse than anything we've encountered, and it's coming for us all." Elena's hands tightened on the controls as she stared out at the stars, the cold emptiness of space stretching infinitely before them. The battle against the predators had only been the beginning. There was something much darker, much older, lurking in the depths of the galaxy, and it was coming. She glanced at Carr, who was staring at her with wide eyes, sensing the shift in the conversation. "Prepare for whatever comes next," Elena said, her voice unwavering. "This isn't over yet, not by a long shot." As the ship hurtled toward the unknown, Elena felt the weight of everything she had learned pressed down on her. The children, the predators, the grid, the ancient beings, none of it had been the final chapter. It was just the beginning. The galaxy had awoken, and whatever was coming, they would have to face it together.